I'm going to read you a brief introduction to Jim Schott because my memory is not what it used to be, and I thought if I tried to memorize it, I'd probably leave something important out. Jim Schott is a person of many interests, including teacher, beekeeper, amateur historian, and owner of an old home in Bay St. Louis that requires a lot of work. It was during his work on his new home on North 2nd Street that he was introduced to the remarkable history of his neighbors at the Saint Augustine Seminary and the Society of the Divine Word, not the diving word, the divine word. Telling that story became important to him and sparked his interest as an amateur historian. In order to have the time to pursue all these interests, Jim retired from Energy Corporation in 2021 after 32 years. Energy is an electric utility that provides electricity to over 3 million customers in Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Southeast Texas. Jim held a number of jobs over the years in power generation and system planning before he retired as an officer of the company and head of the transmission division. I give you Jim Schott.
Good afternoon, everybody. I thank you very much for inviting me. I'm also a member of the society and very, very happy to be so, and thankful all the time for really the very important work that it does. If you're not familiar with it, there's a trove of information. For example, right next to me in this locker that covers 100 years of the history of the seminary as well. They've saved all of the documents that the seminary wrote through the years, and a lot of what you'll see comes from that, as well as a lot of help from, in particular, Father Jim Paulicki, who is at Saint Augustine, which today is a retreat center and a place of residence for a lot of the older SVD. I think this is a very, very important and remarkable history. I had no idea about it, and like in the introduction, until we bought the place here in Bay St. Louis a couple years ago, and I got to know Father Jim Summers, Mike Summers, who was my neighbor across the street there, and encouraged me to look into it. And it is an important story, not only for Catholics, for certainly black men and women, not only Catholic, but in the South. And I'm going to tell you a remarkable story. I think it's important. And I hope that you all will join us next Saturday, the 28th and 29th, for a celebration, a 100-year celebration of the seminary. We're going to have food, music, drinks, soft drinks, and beer. And we're going to have an exhibit that we put together, a very, very nice video and an exhibit at the church, a historical exhibit that we'll cover, and you're going to get a sort of a preliminary taste of. We're also going to have a really great, again, it's the 100th anniversary, and on Sunday there will be a parade from St. Rose to the seminary, which will recreate. Literally, there was over 2,000 men and women that came to Bay St. Louis for the opening in 1923, and they're going to try to recreate that event as well as part of it. So it's just a remarkable and I think important story, underappreciated, and I'm hopefully today. Now, of course, if I can get this to go. I'm sorry, we're having. There we go. So where does it start? So the story starts with the Society of the Divine Word. And I guess let me just, how many of you in here are Catholic? Just so almost all of you. So So a lot of times when you talk about this with people who aren't Catholic, they won't appreciate some of the details. But the Society of the Divine Word is a Catholic order, like the Jesuits are a Catholic order, or Christian Brothers, Franciscans. The Society of the Divine Word was founded in 1875 by this man is Saint Arnold Jansen. He's a German who left Germany and founded the order in Style, Holland. And it is an order, continues to be, it was founded to be an international mission. So they started by going to Africa and China, or I should say first to southeastern, kind of Oceania, and then eventually to China. And they were the first to go into those places, and with the mission to go and bring Catholicism to places that were foreign to that. So over the years, in 1895, the Divine Word decided to let's look at the United States. Over that 20 years since their founding, there was a massive migrations of German Catholics to the United States. If you're not familiar with Catholic history, there weren't really very many Catholics in the United States until really large migration of Irish and Germans in the latter half of the 19th century, 1800s. So this picture is the first missionaries that came. They actually came to Pennsylvania first. The most important, two important people in this picture in the middle, if you can see it, is a man by the name of Brother Wendelin. His name was Joseph Meyer. He came by himself at first, and this was 1895, and they made their kind of money through little German almanacs and prayer schedules and calendars that they would go and use as their mission, and also to raise money. And with the growing German population in the United States, and again they started in Pennsylvania, they were quite successful in kind of publishing and making these things. So they gradually grew. The order headquarters ultimately in that first 20th century was, 19th century, located in Chicago. They built a trade school, one in Pennsylvania, one in Chicago, in a town that they named Techni as in technology, Techni, and really quite successful. You know, and you're thinking about this is only 20 years after the founding. So, you know, this was all to them great, you know, popular, but they really, if you think about their mission, it was again to go to places where their people had not heard of Catholicism. And their Brother Wendelin in the middle again wrote back to St. Arnold, who you saw in the previous picture, and said, you know, look, there is a massive number of black Americans in this country that are primarily Protestant or have never heard of Catholicism, and if we're going to be really successful, this is what we need to do. And the man here at the bottom is a priest. Subsequently, his name is Father John Pyle. He became the head of the SVD at this time in the United States. He was what they call the provincial superior, and he was agreed. And they basically advocated to St. Arnold, who you saw in the previous picture, this is really important. If we're going to be successful, this is the population of folks who have never heard it, and we need to do something. So with that, they wound up at start in the Delta of Mississippi in a town called Marigold, Mississippi, which is in Bolivar County. It's near Cleveland, if you're familiar with the geography of the state. So you might ask yourself, how the heck did they wind up in Marigold, Mississippi from Chicago or Pennsylvania? And the way this came about was the Archbishop of Chicago, where their headquarters had been established, there was a businessman by the name of Walter Bremer who owned businesses and had significant business interests in the county, in Bolivar County. And he was Catholic, and if you're familiar with, you know, there were no Catholics basically in this area. It was all, you know, obviously you can think about the Delta, it was poor. This was 1905, now we're talking about 1905, so you were You were in the middle of the rise of Jim Crow and segregation. Plessy versus Ferguson had been passed and legalized segregation in 1896. So this was right in the middle of rising violence, in particular, in Mississippi, and in particular, even within Mississippi, these types of this area, very poor, and these folks, but they worked for the most part for his his business interests, and his business interests included mills, cotton, obviously, but all of these folks either sharecroppers or part of that community. So donates this land, donates buildings, and a man by the name of Father Aloysius Heik, who's on the right, another German, just comes from the United States, from Germany, moves to the United States, and he's assigned by himself to take over this mission, or to establish this mission. And this is really pretty remarkable story, I think, and I think this is a remarkable person. So Father Heik shows up in Marigold, Mississippi, and within 4 months, he has experienced enormous flooding, a malaria outbreak, and a yellow fever outbreak that prevents the Sisters of the Holy Spirit, missionary Sisters of the Holy Spirit, and I'll talk about them, from coming, because they were going to help establish the school, from getting there. And he still, after this 4-month period, has built a church, a small mission church, and a school which has 50 students in it. And right away, the order sees this real hunger from that community for education. Really, no real opportunities for good education, obviously, and so starts to see success. Well, so what happens? So, unfortunately, as is too often the case in our history, the white community does not want this mission. They don't like to see the success of this school. The local paper starts to write, oppose it, and ultimately Father Heik gets in a conflict with a white man who was beating one of the students, and he breaks this fight up, and overnight he is rescued by his congregation, who wakes him from his sleep and puts him in a box, and they have him escape out of town. So this is 4 months, a remarkable story. And if you read about Father Heik, never talks about this. He's always and there are a lot of letters. He's always very gracious, won't criticize, but others did write about the story to talk about it. So you would think that would be the end, right? That what are we doing? He's by himself. Why are we here? What are we trying to do? And indeed, there was a lot of opposition, even within the order, to continue this mission to black communities in the South. And St. Arnold and Father Heik was obviously upset, right? You can imagine this, but I just thought this was really, important, because any history is about people deciding to stick through things, and very brave people or courageous people. In this case, also people of faith who very, very strongly felt that they had to convert people to Catholicism to save their souls. This was fundamental in their faith and their values and their mission. In this case, he wrote, "Prospects surely do not look good, and my counselors do not want to have anything to do with the Negro mission." And this is him talking about his counselors in Germany and in the U.S. It often happens that something succeeds even though the majority think that the whole effort is hopeless. And he told Father Heik, "Be a catalyst for change and proceed gently, prudently, and courageously." And Father Heik did. So they made a decision, and he didn't leave. He went down to Vicksburg. And in Vicksburg, they chose Vicksburg because there was a small Catholic population there in Vicksburg, so he would have some support. They got a donation from St. Catherine Drexel, who I'm going to talk a little bit more about if you're not familiar with Catherine Drexel. She was a nun, but an heiress to a very, very large family fortune. She was from Philadelphia, and she gave enormous amounts of money to black and Indian missions across the United States, established schools and missions, and was basically the biggest giver, donation-wise, to the SVD as they established these missions and schools, which I'll talk about, and to that actually built the seminary here at Bay St. Louis. A remarkable person. If you're not familiar with, she also, Drexel University in Philadelphia is named for her, and she gave money to establish Xavier University in New Orleans, which is the only it's a historically black Catholic university in the United States. So Hike comes down to Vicksburg. This is right away, right? He doesn't go off somewhere and come back a year or two later. He goes down to Vicksburg. They start to build the mission and school. There's a really great picture, and there are a lot of pictures of him with his parishioners at St. Mary Church. And over time, this mission and school takes. And again, it's the school that really takes. These schools become very, 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 very popular. They grow. This little flyer on the right for St. Mary's Catholic School here in 1910. A picture of the school children in 1920. And the way that they did this, I want to talk a little bit about the Holy Spirit Missionary Sisters, because they're basically the partners to the Society of the Divine Word. The sisters were also, that sisterhood was also founded by St. Arnold, so it's again founded by the same man. Their headquarters globally is in style, just like the Society of the Divine Word. And these sisters came and they staffed and administrated all the schools I'm about to talk to you about, including St. Rose here in Bay St. Louis. So education drives the early success. Every one of these schools they established, these black communities needed good education. That education opportunity came, and they took great advantage of it. So over the next 10 years, by 1915, you had mission and schools established in St. Mary's was first in Vicksburg, in Jackson Holy Ghost School in Meridian, St. Joseph's. The next one was St. Bartholomew in Little Rock, Arkansas, and then Sacred Heart in Greenville. So by 1915, you've got these schools. There were over 1,000 students in these schools across these 5 places. But very, very few of the community members were converting to Catholicism. It was very, very upsetting to them. But and you can look at the reasons. If you were a black person in these communities, you could not. There was not a black priest. There was not. You had to go to basically a church that tended to be segregated. If you weren't in these places, so you were a second class. It was a segregated society, and the Catholic Church did not have black clergy. Whereas if you were in a Protestant denomination, you could go to, you had black congregations. They had their own leadership. So as a black person, the Catholic Church did not offer you much except for school. So the SVD saw this as a moral failing and imperative. If we're going to, they believe, right, that saving somebody's soul, you have to be Catholic. That was, and this is it, right? All of these heathens, you can read their, they're not. This is terrible, and we have to do something. So they started an effort to convince the Catholic Church that we needed to have a black clergy. We need black priests. We need to have, we need to bring fully, the black community into the Catholic Church. And so a priest by the name of James Wendell, another German, came to the area. He ran the St. Joseph's in Meridian. He was the head of that mission. And he was a gifted communicator, writer. And they established what was called the Colored Messenger in 1916. In 1915, the order in the South, and the other thing is there were 5 priests in the South. Those 5 missions, there were 5 priests. This is not like there's a big headquarters somewhere. This is 5 men living in these different places. And they come together in Jackson and they say, we have to do something different. We have to commit to find a way to bring, to form a black clergy. So one of the steps was we have to communicate the success of our missions. We have to talk about these communities and how talented they are and how faithful they are and the great things that they're doing. And so the Colored Messenger over the next 4 years did just that. And it was not just, and it was a national messenger. There was a national Black Catholic movement. And again, to give you kind of perspective, most of the Black Catholics in the United States were along the coast here in Louisiana, Mobile, South Mississippi because of French and Spanish history, and in Maryland. In fact, at this time, there were only 200,000 Black Catholics in the United States, and a quarter of them, actually, 50,000, were actually in the Diocese of Lafayette, which we're going to talk to a little bit. It really very concentrated in our area, of the U.S. So they had a national following for this magazine, and it's another way that they raised money. But and there are examples we'll have at the exhibit of the magazine. So he is successful. He drives not only regional understanding of this challenge. He shows that the magazine shows what's going on in these missions, in these schools, these talented people, how deserving to bring them into the full church. But the other part of building a seminary was you had to be able to educate, beyond elementary and even high school. You have to be able to build a college. And the second person that comes along is Father Matthew Christman, another German, comes to the United States. He's a skilled educator, and he builds in Sacred Heart College. Now, college is kind of a mixed term at this time. It's really a high school, college level kind of program and you're really educating most of these times. It's what you would call an advanced high school. But he forms this college, and this is very. You talk about Greek, Latin, advanced algebra and trigonometry, full, chemistry. You can look at their curriculum, full and very advanced. In fact, you can look and see that there was controversy in Greenville because it offered much more than the local white schools did, and you can go back and talk about. You see that schools in that area, and Greenville was a rich city at this time. It was a major port on the Mississippi. That did challenge and improve even the white schools, but eventually, in 1920, they get permission from the Bishop of Natchez. Natchez at the time was the bishop of the entire state of Mississippi. So the Bishop of Natchez grants them approval to form the seminary, and it's a minor seminary, so it's a college, and it's actually formed at Sacred Heart College in Greenville. And these are the first students. They're teenagers generally, and Father Christman here in the middle. And one of these men, this one here, his name is Maurice Rousseff, actually will become one of the first four that's ordained when he finishes at Saint Augustine. And you asked me about the pronunciation, and I'm going to talk to you in about a second about that. Just as a kind of interest, if you ever walk the property and it's wide open, one of the buildings is Christman. It's named for Father Christman, and another of the buildings is named for Father Wendell. So there's a Wendell building and a Christman building. They're really impressive people if you read what they wrote and what they had to go through. Father Christman would actually, well, we'll talk about it now. So how do you get to base St. Louis? So Greenville and Sacred Heart College was really never the intended place of the final seminary. It was far away from where most Black Catholics were. They wanted to be closer to the coast where they could recruit, Black men to come be part of the seminary. They moved down, and there was also opposition. There was local opposition to the college. So eventually, in 1922, they bought property by the Voorhees family. Which is the current site. You've got a little picture from about 1922 of what generally the property looked like. Father Christman moves down with his students. By the way, over the first 3 years or 2 years at Greenville, he starts with 6 young men, and by the time he's moving, there's 25. And they're from all over the United States. You can look at where they were born. Most of them are Louisiana, but there are California, New York, Maryland, Chicago, Kentucky. They came from all over the United States. And very quickly, there is a hunger for that. So this is the first. I want to show you some pictures now. Everybody kind of likes seeing old pictures. This was the first priest house and chapel at Saint Augustine. Now here I'm gonna give you your. So I always said Saint Augustine. I think Jim said Saint Augustine. Maybe that's because we heard it from our parents growing up, and because we both had New Orleans kind of roots. But I was told in no uncertain terms by them that it is Saint Augustine. So forgive me, I try to say St. Augustine, but I'm always going back to St. Augustine. I don't know if that's right or wrong, but I will just tell you that that's what the current provincial says is St. Augustine. Anybody see it differently? I don't know. So it's St. Augustine. This is the first building, right? This was where they lived. This was the chapel. I mentioned money. When you read the articles, every one of these St. Augustine messengers have a plea for money. They're national. They're like, they didn't have any. They got relatively little support from the diocese. Most of what they came from external places. They had poor parishes, right? These are not parishes or people. Most of what they got came from St. Catherine Drexel, who I've mentioned before, the Indian and Mission National, and then periodic donations. And we'll talk about life, but also think about these young men that were coming here. They typically came from very poor families. It was a big deal to leave your family because you were a working hand in the house, right, to help make money. So when they came here, they were leaving home. It was an enormous sacrifice for their families. It was a sacrifice of faith, obviously. It was a sacrifice for their future because it was education as well. But they had to do all of they had to take care of that place on their own, essentially, because there wasn't much of a staff. So they did the gardening, the farming, the food, the construction. We'll talk a little bit more. I got nice pictures of that. But the money. So where'd the money? So money. They did raise money. They did get donations. This is the minor seminary under construction in 1922, and in 1923 the minor seminary was finished. The minor seminary is basically, that's kind of they would call it the high school college, concept. That obviously is no longer here. It was torn down through the years, but this was the first minor seminary in 1923. There's how it. This is the next. I've got this. This is wrong. No, it's not wrong. So the next thing built was the Saint Augustine Chapel, which still exists. So you can see the orientation of where it was, the chapel, and then the minor seminary next to it. Again, this is gone. And then in 1936, this says 32. I've got to correct that. This may be under construction, but they started to build the major seminary. I'm gonna let you get that. So the major seminary is really what you would think of as the graduate school, right? So if you finished your 4 to 6 years of minor seminary, which is basically college, then you go to graduate school and you get, I would call it a PhD to become a priest. So you spend 4 to 6 years in getting an advanced degree with theology and philosophy, theology. That's what priests do when they study. So this was the major seminary. This would be where the graduate students went to school after they finished their major seminary. And this is the finished major seminary at Saint Augustine. And then you can see where it was kind of shoehorned in the old, at the time it was sat again next to the current chapel, which is still there, and this minor seminary sits kind of behind it. You can't see it in there anymore. Again, all of that is no longer here. The only thing that exists today is the chapel. This is just the other thing I found that's interesting. I found these in the Mississippi archives, state archives. There was a whole series of postcards around Bay St. Louis that you could go find. And this was a collection from somebody. So there were postcard pictures of the seminary. This happens to be the backside of the major seminary. And then there used to be this, if you've ever seen the grotto on the site, and then there used to be a little lake and pond in front of that, which no longer exists. But I just thought that was interesting. You all might find it. So we're going forward. The seminary, over the years, I'll talk a little bit about life at the seminary. I've talked to you about the life. Most of these men, again, came from families that did not have a lot, and it was a big deal to move off. They spent typically, again, 4 to 6 years at the minor seminary, which was high school / college. They would go off for a year to Chicago to spend a year with the society, where they would, that's when you become a member of the order, and then they would come back to finish in 6 years their master's and PhD that led to their ordination. So it took about 12 years. This was if you assume they were starting generally in high school. So life at the seminary, again, I've talked about how they had to take care of the grounds and raise food and gardens, but they did have time for a lot of really lots of wonderful extracurricular activities. I don't have a lot of pictures, but there was music, there was theater, there was athletics. There was an extensive amount of service within the community. You can look at, there's lots and lots of pictures. There's a picture of the basketball team. There's a wonderful article one year about their baseball team. There's a wonderful article about football one time, which was not a very particularly popular sport. It talks about this crazy new sport and that they're playing. So there's a lot of life. And I want to mention the brothers. And I got, the brother, you may not be, so brothers within an order, they're not priests. They basically at some point decide, my service to my faith is going to be at some skill, some vocation or skill and service, but I'm not going to become a priest. So there was a rich life of a brother, to run that place, and the SVD priests today would tell you, and there still remain today. There's brothers that really make the place go. That we should never think about that seminary without these brothers. But they did various things, and these are little excerpts from these society documents. This is from 1920s, but the carpenter shop, a tailor shop, a book bindery. They did a lot of book publishing, lots and lots of book publishing that they sent material out again to publish and promote their activities and all of the good things that were happening. Another few pictures. I just think this guy's wonderful, this huge smile. But he's in the carpenter shop, a laundry shop, and then this old, I don't know what, Saint Augustine Seminary truck, obviously advertising, going around town, doing whatever was needed to be done and providing service. What's that?
It was
moonshine.
Jim, brother on the top is Brother Joe. He actually ran the shoe shop.
Is that right? That's more like your. Yeah. That looks like.
That's Brother Joe.
Okay.
Probably Brother Albert driving the truck.
Okay. Great. So a lot of life out here, right? A lot of life and a lot of important life. And Maurice just mentioned, because I watched a video. I told him I was going to do this, but you talk about the importance of this, and I probably even better for Maurice to speak to it, but. The 100 Men Club, they've done an interview with Maurice and three other gentlemen about life as a black man growing up in Bay St. Louis. And they sent me an excerpt talking about how important the seminary was because of the professional, it was an exposure to professionals, right? Educated professional people in the community. And I'm taking your words, but I thought that was really powerful for me to appreciate the broader impact of that. So that's the good part of life. The other part of it is this is historic, right? No black priests that are being trained in the United States at this time. There had been some when you go back 20 years. There were 3, but it failed because bishops would not take them into their parishes. So this is a new tribe. This is within the order. These 4 men, Anthony Burgess, Maurice Rousseff, Francis Wade, and Vincent Smith, in 1934 were ordained. Once again, there's an enormous amount of people that come for this historic occasion to Bay St. Louis for their ordination. But the lead up to their ordination is still problematic because they didn't know where they were going to go. All right, we've got black priests. Where are they going to go? And again, if you think about the Catholic Church, the hierarchy, bishops run their diocese. So the SVD, and I'm sorry, I keep SVD as short for the Society of Divine Word, it's their Latin acronym. The SVD actively worked with the national bishops to see where they could place these 4 men. And they were met with opposition. And literally up until 1934, when they were ordained, they were still trying to find a place that would take them in. And 2 bishops stepped forward. Bishop of Alexandria, his name was Desmond, and the Bishop of Lafayette, and they both in Louisiana, whose name was, why am I forgetting his name? He's a very important, Jules Jean-Mard. So Jules Jean-Mard was the most practical. Alexandria was much smaller, and there were significant issues. But Jean-Mard in Lafayette established he built a separate church. And established what they called, I won't go into detail of their politics, but deanery, and brought all 4 of these men to what is Immaculate Heart of Mary Church. And if you go to Immaculate Heart of Mary, I happen to be a Lafayette native. My parents live there. There is a very large monument out in front of that, which is to these 4 men who, this was the first church in the United States that took in black men. They were exceptionally successful. Now Lafayette also has the highest number of black Catholics in the U.S. at the time. A quarter of black Catholics were in that diocese. But they very quickly, they set their own missions up in rural parts of that area. They quickly established new churches and just overwhelmingly successful. And Jean-Mard really was very, I would say his words that he spoke later as they succeeded, just glowing about, what these 4 folks were able to accomplish. And really, that's, a quick end of the story. The rest of the story is that this is a little bit later, 1950s, along the Divine Word Mission Trail. They established missions across the Southeast, again in predominantly black communities. There were 9 bishops that were trained here at the seminary. The first black man to be a bishop, named bishop in the United States, Gerald Perry, was a graduate here. The first actual bishop that graduated was actually named a bishop in Africa, in Accra, that came from here. So just a really, I think, important and powerful story about what was not going to happen, except, you would not, I don't know how long it would have taken, but no one else was trying to bring black priests and a black clergy to the U.S., and they overcame quite a bit, which I probably am underserving, with both the priests in the SVD and the people and the men that went out to these parishes and had to deal with the fundamental racism, segregation that lasted. And there are pretty remarkable stories of some of the travails that they went through locally when they went out to back in the 50s and 60s, when we had a kind of this even civil rights in Brown versus Board of Education. There was a resurgence in opposition to a lot of these priests serving in, and even to the point where there's a story in Louisiana, in Belle Chase, not far. One of the priests here was on assignment for vacationing priests, and they refused to let him in because they didn't want to have a black priest serve mass, and the Archbishop of New Orleans excommunicated and shut down the church, which was a mission church. And so that was a very major step in this was 1958 for the church to do that. So, and that's another history, right? This was a priest, Louis Gilbert, out of this, was serving here at Saint Augustine, as part of one of the major parts of the desegregation. So I think it's just a little known, very powerful, very important story, both historically for our region, for our country, for Catholics, not only Catholics, but for desegregation, and for obviously the community and importance that they play for people. So, good question. I'll stop.
They had some significant buildings that got built. Why were they all taken down?
Yeah, so the seminary closed, the major seminary closed in 1968 because it really part of the broader changes in the church. There was fewer and fewer priests, or people going to the priests. It was expensive to run, the seminary here, and they consolidated the seminary with their major seminary in Chicago. So you were past, and again, now you're past all the segregation and the society moves, so they have integrated, and they just couldn't afford to keep this one open. It was too small, it was limited, and they moved them to Chicago. Now the high school stayed open until I think 1980, and the minor college, the minor seminary, and it closed later. And over the years, I don't know why or when exactly they tore the buildings down, but did you have a question, Maurice, or comment?
I was going to tell you, Bishop Harold Perry, I'm a pharmaceutical rep in Houston, Texas in the early 1980s. I called on a doctor, and his name is Levi Perry. He's a cardiologist. And just to make your point about the impact of professional, his brother's a cardiologist in Houston, his wife is a pediatrician. They have 10 kids, all professional, doctors, and two lawyers and 8 doctors in the family. His brother.
Yeah.
Still living.
Yeah. He's an impressive man. He also was the first black clergy of any type to speak to open and say prayer at the House of Representatives. He was an advisor to Johnson and Kennedy in civil rights, and again in New Orleans he was the first auxiliary bishop. Just impressive. Yeah.
I was going to say, I think it's remarkable that both Gulfside and Saint Augustine are both 100 years ago, and were located in the very deep South, and were tolerated.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
Says a lot for the community.
Yeah.
And I'll make a point on that too. I went to University of Southern Mississippi. Martin Labat and I were college roommates. We went to USM. You guys from the coast are different. So when you say deep South, it's hard to say Bay St. Louis is deep South, or the Mississippi Gulf Coast is deep South, because the experiences of some of my classmates at USM were totally different from my experiences down here. Yeah.
Well, maybe it's because it was predominantly Catholic down here.
Predominantly Catholic. I think the influx of the Air Force base, the Navy base, the influx of people coming from both East and West, and I think a lot of my classmates just didn't have that kind of exposure.
I think that that's everything that y'all said is correct. I don't want to lose track though that you can read about local congregations when these men went to serve at there were cases where they didn't want them to come. So it was not perfect. Challenges, but I think clearly a different level, like you've described, and that was a big reason they came down here from the north. Yeah.
Not as important as that, but what do you know about the grotto? I know that grottos in America are sort of a German thing.
I wish I knew more, and I'm going to have to study that up before we have our thing next week. I don't know a lot about the grotto. I'm sorry.
It's really cool.
Yeah, it's beautiful, and there is going to be at our big celebration there will be a grotto tour. There's going to be somebody available to provide some answers about that and talk to it, so come on out.
Anybody who's coming to the thing next week? Anybody?
Yeah, so I think there's 7 bishops from around the SVD. So just to give you some perspective on the society today, the society continues to serve predominantly poor and underrepresented communities. Generally, they're more and more Hispanic. A lot of Texas they're predominantly, they're all over, but predominantly in the southern province, which is the headquarters, is here. The southern province of the SVD is here. Is located here. That remains the headquarters. And that southern province stretches from Texas to Florida and up throughout the southeast. And they predominantly serve, for example, in Jackson, let me pick that as an example. They serve a predominantly black church that is in a very poor, and I live in Jackson, very poor neighborhood, very small and declining population. But they provide a very unique they keep that open because the SVD provides a priest to serve that basically mission community. Now, if they happen to have to pull that priest out and can't represent that church anymore, that church would then become consolidated with the rest of that diocese. So that's kind of typical of what you see the SVD today is. It's really they tend to be in poor churches, churches that are struggling to, and they're serving that kind of, again, kind of consistent with their history, right? Serving communities that won't have church, a Catholic church, if not for them.
Jim, one of the celebrants at that Mass on that Sunday the 29th is going to be Bishop Steib. I was at his ordination in January of '67. I think it was either '66 or '67. I think he's going to be the main celebrant.
I think that's right, yeah. And I'm sorry, I got away from your question. So who's going to be there? So you'll have several bishops from around the really predominant U.S., southern U.S. You're going to have the global superior, they're now is in Rome, used to be in Germany, but they have the Pope Francis has written a letter to, which will be kind of read out and presented. And there will be lots of members of congregations from a lot of these parishes, Lafayette, Port Arthur, Texas. They're going to be coming down. So you'll have a pretty good, but it's also, we're going to have music. We want everybody to come, including the Stars Band in the evening. So, it's going to be fun too. And then the next day will be a Mass along with the walk. So I should have said, so if I'm running too late, y'all kick me off. The in 1923, when they celebrated the opening of the seminary, there were literally thousands of people that came, and predominantly black from all across the Gulf South, and they formed a parade at the train station here at the depot, and there's a very clear written description of that day, where they marched from the depot all the way to the seminary, and they talk about how they marched through the business town. And I think if you think about what life was like in 1923, how that was a unique thing for literally thousands of black men and women, and the Knights of Peter Claver, familiar with them in their full garb. They talk about being 500 of them, walking through. It's just a remarkable picture. You think about that and the importance of what that event was and what it meant. So we're gonna gather at St. Rose and recreate of sorts that parade. The Knights will be there, and we'll walk to the seminary. And at the seminary, there'll be Mass, a high Mass with the bishops to give it. So it'll be a really nice event. And we have a really nice exhibit that we've put together, historical exhibit, which will be in the chapel, along with a video that's really, really good, much better than what I could have done here, and that Father Paulicki and the SVD have put together. So I hope you all can come. I think it'll be fun and educational. And